It is August 9th, 2024, and it has been more than a week since Israel carried out a string of attacks that included the assassination of Palestinian diplomat and Hamas political chief Ismail Haniyeh while he was on a visit to Tehran. Now, Iran has said that they are planning a response. Hezbollah has said that they are also preparing a response. But when is it going to come? How is it going to happen? And who is going to be involved? Those are the questions that we continue to ask, right? The mysteries that are out there. But even though the US and Israel are in a position of kind of seeming to say, get this retaliation over with, the reality is that they don't get to choose the timeline. And that's part of it at the end of the day. But should we really be surprised that Iran didn't just respond immediately? Well, if we look back to what they did in April when they were retaliating against Israel for its targeted attack on an Iranian consulate building in Syria, we have to remember that didn't just take days, that took a couple of weeks. And there were a number of reasons why we're not seeing immediate retaliation now, and still a lot of questions about what we could see and when it could happen. So we discussed all of that earlier with a special guest. So let's take a listen to that conversation now. Joining me now to discuss is Ehsan Safarnejad, an Iran-based journalist who shares analysis on news, geopolitics, Iran, the Middle East, Russia, China, and the global South. Ehsan, thanks so much for taking the time to join me.
Well, thank you for inviting me on your show.
I want to get your take on the latest here. I know that the world is currently waiting to see when, and of course, how Iran and Hezbollah specifically will respond to the attacks and assassinations carried out by Israel last week that included the killing of a senior Hezbollah commander and the political chief of Hamas who was in Tehran for a visit. What is the atmosphere like there in Iran right now as we're kind of in this waiting period?
Well, some people are really anxious to see the Iranian retaliation. And since people have short-term memory problems, apparently, they have forgotten that the last time that an attack by the Israeli side was carried out on the Iranian consulate in Syria, it was on April 1st, and it took Iran 2 weeks to respond. The Iranian retaliation took place on April 14th. So, based on that framework, based on that time frame, I think that we're still waiting the appropriate amount of time, and it is consistent with the Iranian modus operandi that it takes its time with designing the operation and deciding which targets it's going to hit or strike in a retaliatory response. So in that case, uh, everything is fine. All these rumors that are circulating around online, some of them are due to the fact that people are really anxious to see the latest developments, and the media outlets are sort of taking that into their own advantage in order to get more likes. But uh, still, by the time that you and I are having this conversation, there is no official outlet news, any video, any interview that would indicate where we are, when we are going to see the retaliation. Uh, it's just hearsay, and the sources that are putting out the news are not the best ones in terms of their history. They have published a lot of fake news, and they even endorsed wars in their own way. So in terms of that, there is nothing new to say. All we know is that retaliation will happen. The retaliation will come mainly from Iranian side, but different fronts will be involved in the retaliation. This was a statement made by the chief of Iranian secretary of the Supreme National Council, who is a very important figure in deciding the Iranian security decisions. So based on that, we know that again the main operation will be carried out by Iran, but different fronts will operate. Now, this is my assessment that probably the resistance groups in Iraq, Lebanon, and Yemen uh, will be involved in such attack. But again, I think that we are going to see it in two different chapters, if you can think of it as that. A chapter in which Iran will strike Israel, and the next chapter will be the attack by other fronts.
Okay, that's good to know and to keep in mind. And I know that there have been a lot of comparisons drawn to what we saw back in April when you're right. I mean, we did have that waiting period then, and it almost kind of seemed like the US and Israel specifically, like they expected more of a retaliation from Iran. Like you had Israel wanting a regional war back then in April. How do you view that compared to this current situation where, given the string of assassinations and attacks that Israel carried out, it almost feels like they are begging the axis of resistance for a wider war, begging them to get involved so that they can go to war and then drag the US into it?
Well, the key point was what you mentioned. They want a regional war which United States would fight for them. They don't want a regional or broader war. UC Versa published an article on, I think it was Haaretz, if I'm not mistaken, in which he explained why Netanyahu actually doesn't want a war. And Israel on its own is completely incapable of fighting a broader war, and that's very understandable. It's due to its inherent nature, the characteristics of the occupied Palestine, that it doesn't give you a lot of sphere of influence. So they're very limited. They're surrounded by different countries, and they don't have too much of a wiggle room in order to experiment with a concept like a broader regional conflict. Now, the trick is and this is what they do through Mossad. They try to lay these traps in a way, in the way of the axis of resistance. They want to trick the axis of resistance into retaliating in a manner that then everybody forgets about all the raping, all the massacre, genocide, bombing of civilians, indiscriminate killing, murdering, maiming, torturing, that all of this then would be sidelined by the images and the footages that would come out of different parts of the occupied Palestine, with video footages of settlers being wounded. And that is something that Iran and the axis of resistance tries its best in order to prevent. They're not going to give them what they want. However, this doesn't mean that they automatically shy away from responding, which is a basic right of any country whose sovereignty has been violated by another nation state or any other group, to have a shot at a retaliatory response. The previous time, with regards to what happened the previous time, what happened was exactly what Iran wanted. Iran's main objective was as follows. One, Iran was trying to establish a precedent. Now, when you and I are talking about what is going to happen in future, I can bring up the fact that previous time around, Iran struck Israel and no broader conflict erupted. So this is something that people can rely on in order to have theories, right? And in a way, Iran tried its best in order to de-incentivize people, desensitize people, so that they wouldn't behave the same way that they might have reacted if a broader damage would have been done to the occupied Palestine, Israel, the Israeli regime. And that was something that Iran was very successful at doing, establishing a precedent. Now, the second thing which Iran did, and this was very apparent from the footages that we saw, last time, uh, Iran wanted to send this message, convey this, message that it can reach Israel when it's most ready and show how vulnerable it is. Let me elaborate. There is a very distinct video footage that came out last time, and it is the precise moment that you can see that the air defense systems are running out of ammunition and interceptor missile. Well, this is basically, for those who are not really familiar with military weaponry, this is the equivalent of that moment in movies that you see the protagonist has a gun in his hand and he shoots until he draws blank. The magazine goes empty. Now, in a comical, scenes, films and movies tend to show that the main character would then throw the gun. So it doesn't matter if you have Arrow 2, Arrow 3, and how much you brag about having the most sophisticated air defense system, which are arguable, in a way. And there are other things to talk about as well. So there are the demons are in the details. But it doesn't matter how sophisticated your systems are. When you don't have any missiles, any bullet to put in your gun is as good as useless. And that was something that Iran showed, that it can easily oversaturate the air defense systems of the Zionist regime. Another thing that Iran showed was how sophisticated its technology is. Iran only used, decade and a half, 17-year-old missiles, not very sophisticated missiles. The only missile that had, some pizzazz or some, interesting concept behind it was Khaybar Shekan. That it uses a maneuverable re-entry vehicle. And what this basically means is that the warhead is capable of changing its trajectory in order to evade the air defenses of the enemy. And basically Iran was successful in doing all three of these things, establishing a precedent, showcasing that it can easily overpower the Israeli regime in an all-out war scenario. And the third part was to show how it possesses the real ability and technology. And this is not just quantity that we are talking about, it is the quality of the Iranian warheads that speak for themselves on the battlefield. Iran carried out these messages very clearly, but apparently the message wasn't received in Tel Aviv as well as it could have. And that's why you have this new development and this new episode. And based on the interviews, the very broad and general statements that were given by the generals in the IRGC, in the Iranian armed forces in general, they're going to respond in a forceful manner this time. They're going to ramp up escalation in a way. And the objective of this episode is to take what was established as a precedent and take it into a new norm, which then, you and, many people inside West, the analysts, then they would view this as something not as not an outlier, but something that is more common than what people think. And then maybe after this, all the hysteria about Iranian response erupting and causing World War III would then end, because it is within the Iranian right to have a retaliatory strike on Israel due to the fact that its sovereignty has been violated by the Zionist regime.
Yeah, and I appreciate the explanation there. It's interesting to see how we have Iran kind of in this place of balancing everything, right? On one hand, they want to stand up for the Palestinians in Gaza who are being targeted by Israel in this genocidal war. On the other hand, they're now in a position of having to, respond to Israel after it carried out this assassination of a guest in Tehran. And you also have, in addition to, I know that the US is kind of a party to this conflict. I thought it was also interesting that you had Russia send the secretary of its Security Council to Tehran for talks late last week. And you've had some talk on social media saying that, Russia is sending weapons to Iran. I know that there hasn't been any official confirmation on that, but how do you view Iran's ties with Russia and kind of where Iran stands, especially with countries like Russia, where they have come in to, I would say, provide support, but also to stand up against the West and everything that is coming against Iran?
Well, the meeting between Mr. Shoigu and the Iranian senior officials was planned a long time before this. He was here at the invitation of the Iranian Secretary of Supreme National Security Council, and this was long. This was something that was long planned. So it doesn't have a particular tie to the recent developments in the region. I'm sure that the topic was brought up in the bilateral talks that the Iranian Secretary of Supreme National Security Council had with his counterpart in Russia. I'm sure that the topic was discussed, but people always tend to exaggerate these kind of meetings. It didn't have any particular tie with the current development in the region. However, Iran and Russia are strategic allies of one another. Obviously, Iran is helping Russia in evading sanctions in different ways. Iran has been dealing with sanctions for years now, for almost 40 years. It has now experts that are really knowledgeable about different ways and methods that you can circumvent sanctions in order to ease the pressure that they will enforce on your population. And that's a way that Iran was helping back at the earlier stages of the war between Russia and Ukraine. The Minister of Transportation in Russia gave us an interview in which he talked about how Iranian side is helping Russia in procuring plane parts that they would be able to maintain their airliners. You might also find it interesting that Iran also maintains and overhauls the Russian airliners. For example, there was this Airbus airplane A300-330 that was flown to Iran in order to be maintained by the Iranian experts. The collaboration doesn't end here. Iran exports tires, home appliances, construction materials to Russia as well. Iran builds sophisticated gas turbines that Russia uses because it wants to export gas. Obviously, a country that has the largest gas reserves in the world is in need of gas turbines, and Iran does a hell of a job of building those. So in this kind of a strategic choice, both in economic affairs, as I mentioned, and military affairs, like the war in Syria, which the two countries fought against the extremist fundamentalist forces of ISIS, and their collaboration on the security situation in South Caucasus, the terrorism of ISIS-K, which is a branch of ISIS that is predominantly present in Central Asia, the collaboration of two countries in organizations like BRICS, Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and different organizations, regional organizations like the Eurasian basically group. These are all things that makes Iran and Russia really close. So this wasn't out of the ordinary, and I'm sure that they will continue. But having said all of this, these meetings can be postponed. And the fact that it wasn't, in a way, sends a message that in a possible scenario of an all-out war, Russia will be a little bit more determined in showcasing its power and in exerting its influence on the global stage. And from the looks of it, it has already decided which side it's going to partner up with.
Yeah, that does seem to be the case. And it's interesting too. I appreciate your explanation there because when it comes down to it, you look at the current situation that we're in and the role that certainly the US has played getting itself, hold on, excuse me, um,
No worries.
that you see the role that the US has played in the region and how it has gotten involved and all of the chaos and destruction that has resulted from that. And I wanted to go back to a comment that you made earlier, looking at kind of the situation that Israel is in right now, this question of whether Netanyahu wants a wider war, because on one hand, it seems as though he's trying to distract from the fact that he claimed he would defeat Hamas in Gaza. Clearly, he has not done that, has not gotten anywhere close to that, and instead has just killed tens of thousands of Palestinian civilians. And you look at the current situation where now we're not only waiting for what the retaliation from Iran and Hezbollah and Ansar Allah is going to look like, but we're also seeing these reports that Israel is considering some sort of a preemptive strike, right? If they think that Iran is going to target them, then they could strike first, which in this case would just be a strike. But what are the concerns there for, I guess, how far Netanyahu is willing to go, especially as you have, Iran and Hezbollah saying, look, we do not want a regional war. It seems like they're doing everything in their power to prevent that from happening, but at the same time, they still have to respond.
I'd like to clarify what I said. Iran doesn't want an all-out war or any kind of a strike that then would remove the world's sympathy with the Palestinians. It doesn't
Mhm.
want the narrative to shift and the oppressor then would become the victim and the victim become the oppressor. Iran doesn't want that, but it doesn't mean that Iran is not ready. And some fractions of the Iranian establishment and the Iranian people wouldn't really beg for such war in which they would be able to exert their force and side with the oppressed people of Palestine that are being indiscriminately bombed. I mean, it seems that in the Israeli vocabulary, in the Israeli dictionary, schools, hospitals, churches, mosques, places of worship in general, UN bases, they're all called Hamas bases. And the fact that Iranian people are really frustrated with the rest of the world, not really putting out there any real initiative or action that would prevent the reoccurrence of such instances, is really something that, again, frustrates the Iranians. And well, people inside the country are really ready, for any scenario, right? That's something that the population feels, and this is most certainly the thing that the Iranian military apparatus feels. Previous time in after the Operation True Promise One, the head of the IRGC Aerospace Force, General Amir Ali Hajizadeh, gave out an interview, and in which he said, uh, "We he was explaining how many missiles they have launched, what were the specifics of the operation in general, and he said, my colleagues and I are all wishing for an opportunity to have a chance to carry out the second iteration of Operation True Promise. So this is not something that they weren't ready for. All this talk by Netanyahu that they are ready that he's ready in order to have an all-out war is just a way of him using the madman theory. But he's almost like a child, and he's failing at doing so, because then you read Benny Gantz and I forgot the other military general in Israel who came out and said, we wanted to respond to Iran, but Netanyahu didn't accept. The fact that this person tried to look tough, but actually is very scared. And he's doing everything. I'm sure that you and your audience have read the news about how he has prepared the protocol for him and his wife and his son to go to special bunkers, which has angered the settlers in occupied Palestine, about the fact that these people, namely his son and his wife, why should they get any special treatment? So these things in Iran, they're not really flying. These type of propaganda are not really flying by the decision makers and by the analysts and geopolitical experts. In putting that aside, I think that Iran understands that it has to reimpose deterrence. If you do not reestablish a deterrence against an enemy that says that Israel should appear like a mad dog on the global stage, and for those who want to rush into calling me an anti-Semite, this is something that former Israeli, defense minister Moshe Dayan said. For a country that has the Dahia doctrine, for those who don't know, this is a doctrine which advocates for targeting civilians and civilian infrastructure and civilian targets in order to create a deterrence. When you are faced with such an enemy, any show of force by you, any lack of a willingness to show force by you does not encourage your enemy to behave rationally. It emboldens them in order to pursue what they were pursuing before. So in Iran, this is a very common understanding that a retaliation, as contradictory as it might sound to people, is actually works fine, and it works in favor of preventing a war in this scenario, because otherwise they will think that they can continue carrying out these strikes with impunity, which is a very dangerous false notion that if Israeli commanders believe that is the case, then that means that we are going to see repetition of these atrocious behaviors by Israel.
Yeah, I know that there is certainly a lot at stake here all around, and I really appreciate you taking the time to join me today to break down all of the latest here. Ehsan Safarnejad, an Iran-based journalist and geopolitical analyst, thank you so much for your time and insight.
Thanks for inviting me.
If anything in this video resonated with you, be sure to like it, share it with your friends, leave a comment, and as always, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to keep up with all of my work, make sure that you're subscribed to my page on Substack. That's rachelblevins.substack.com. If you want to support my work, you can also check out my page on Patreon. That's patreon.com/rachelblevins. That's where you can sign up as a monthly paid subscriber and join the community there. As always, thank y'all so much for all of your support, and I'll see you next time.